So I hope you're enjoying your time at the conference so far. My name's Matt, and some of you might have seen me already. I am the Deputy Director at the Natural History Consortium, and I am very, very pleased to be able to welcome and to be joined by fresh-faced on a 7 a.m. on a California Thanksgiving morning by Alison Young and Lila Higgins, the creators of the City Nature Challenge program. And we're also joined by Victoria Burton from the Natural History Museum in London. And me and Victoria will be giving a bit more of a UK perspective on this amazing program as well. But without further ado, what I'll do is I'll just hand straight over to Alison and Lila, who are going to share a few slides and tell us a bit of context about the challenge and what it's all about.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Let me get my screen up. There we go. Yeah, so we were going to start off with a little quick history of the City Nature Challenge for those of you who may or may not be familiar with it. So the City Nature Challenge is run by our two museums. I'm at the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. Lila's at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County down in Los Angeles. So the City Nature Challenge started in 2016 in response to the very first Citizen Science Day that was announced. And basically people were asked to do something on Citizen Science Day, which I think was April 16th that year, to celebrate citizen science, get the word out. And Lila and my co-director, Rebecca Johnson, and I we've been colleagues for a long time and friends, and we do very similar styles of citizen/community science, but we'd never done a project together. So we decided to play on the natural rivalry between our two cities. San Francisco and Los Angeles have lots of rivalries, especially in things like sports. And we decided, though, to make a challenge about nature. And so the very first ever City Nature Challenge started in 2016, just between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It was 8 days long that year, which we soon realized was far too long to keep up that sort of stamina for searching for observations. And basically what we asked people to do is to get out in our area over those 8 days and make observations using iNaturalist. And the city that made the most observations and found the most species and had the most participants would win. That year, Los Angeles beat us in San Francisco, which we were sorely disappointed about. They won in all three categories. But the thing that we were most amazed at is that we had over 1,000 people participate, and we made close to 20,000 observations altogether that first year, which kind of made us think that maybe we kind of found something that seemed to excite people. And that first year, as we were talking about the City Nature Challenge and taunting each other on social media, we kept having people ask, like, what is the City Nature Challenge and how can my city be involved? So in 2017, we decided to open it up to any city in the US. And that year we had 16 cities across the United States participate. We shortened it to 5 days that year. And in those 5 days, we had more than 4,000 people participate and make over 125,000 observations of their local nature in their city, which was pretty amazing. That year, Dallas and Houston and Texas won for most observations and most species. Los Angeles still had the most participants that year. And after 2017, we thought, what's the next step for scaling? And we just said, let's just make it the whole world. So in 2018, we opened it up to any city around the world who wanted to participate. We had 68 cities in 2018 participate in the City Nature Challenge, the very first international one, and the only one that we've ever had, there you go, down there, Antarctica participate in, which we were pretty excited about. And that year, we made over 440,000 observations and had 17,000 people around the world participate. And since then, just through word of mouth, it's continued to grow internationally. In 2019, we had 155 cities around the world participate. And this is when that 2018 and 2019 was when we kind of got down to our 4-day format, a 4-day BioBlitz in cities around the world, Friday through Monday. And that was the year that we got super close to 1 million observations in 4 days, which we were so excited about, with 35,000 people around the world participating. 2018, San Francisco swept all the categories and won the City Nature Challenge. In 2019, newcomer Cape Town in South Africa actually had the most observations and the most species in 2019. San Francisco still had the most participants in 2019. I'm going to turn it over to Lila, though, to talk about what 2020 looked like for the City Nature Challenge.
Thanks, Alison. So we were organizing and then COVID hit. We were on our organizer call in February, and our organizers in the Philippines and in China were like, well, we can't meet in groups outside, said the Filipino organizer. And then the Chinese organizer, or multiple of them, said, we can't even go outside. So we're like, how can we support you? Never thinking that we were going to have to make these same adaptations. And so we, click Alison, decided that it was not going to be a competition this year. And instead, we were going to make it a collaboration. And so normally our City Nature Challenges are all about BioBlitzes and these in-person events. And these are pictures from all over the world of people doing that. And unfortunately, we just knew that we had to pivot, and this is not possible. So we encouraged everyone to go with what their local governments were saying was the safety protocols for each city. In LA, we were encouraging, obviously, social distancing and saying what that was, because people still didn't know what that term meant, wearing a cloth face mask and washing your hands when you get home. But again, each city needed to do what they needed to do. And this was some of the City Nature Challenge looks from Los Angeles 2020. We also knew and know that nature is healing. It lowers your heart rate. It can lower your cortisol levels. It can really just, make us feel less stressed out. And many of us were feeling pretty stressed out being in these various states of lockdown all around the world. So we knew that nature was healing, and we wanted to encourage people to get up close and personal with nature however they could. And so in LA and for other places around the world, we were encouraging people to go indoors, stay inside. If you don't feel comfortable going outside, or you're not allowed to go outside, there's still nature inside your homes. These are all photographs from inside my mother's home where I was on lockdown. A brown widow egg case, a beautiful crane fly, and a tiny little aphid. We were also encouraging people to take pictures maybe of things that they could see outside their windows. So this is a tiny, beautiful hummingbird nest from outside of one of my staff's windows. And you can see the two beautiful eggs inside of it. And he was able to observe this, some solace during the City Nature Challenge and COVID. If you were lucky enough to have a yard, which not everyone in Los Angeles is able to have that, if you could go out onto a balcony, if there are any plants out there, or even maybe on your doorstep, we were encouraging people to do that. In LA, we were allowed to go on a neighborhood walk, and people could take photos there as well. And then last but not least, in Los Angeles, some nature areas were open. And this is a photo from one of our City Nature Challenge 2020 participants, Diego Tamayo, of a beautiful black phoebe sitting on a COVID closure sign. So let's share a few of the quotes from our organizers from 2020. We always like to do evaluation, and this is from Paul Brown in Luxembourg. We extended the area in which the observations could be made to the entire country. We wanted to make sure that participants had the chance to participate without moving away from their homes. We focus more on iNaturalist as a tool to build the local national community. And now to a quote from Hanish Manal in Constantine, Algeria. This was our first City Nature Challenge, and it was really difficult for us because of the quarantine that was suddenly imposed on our country. The situation was very bad in the beginning. But participation of 6 members of the association created a difference or a miracle, as they managed to tour the entire majority of the city of Constantine and collect the largest number of observations. Now over to, I think, Hong Kong. Yeah, Sean Martin. We couldn't do any backyard bioblitzes as the majority of Hong Kongers live in apartment buildings that have no balcony. However, we were allowed to leave our homes for essential outings. At WWF Hong Kong, we organized a mini BioBlitz at the Mai Pao Nature Reserve with the most stringent social distancing possible, and they had some reasonable success. And last, we're going to share a organizer from the UK. So this was Ellie Sherlock in the Greater Manchester CNC, and encouraging people to record wildlife in their gardens and around their homes or from their windows. there were more people taking part, and there was a sense of community, and it was something to look forward to and get excited about over the weekend, which we kind of all needed because of lockdown. Back to you, Alison.
Yeah, so in 2020, even though we were all in various stages of lockdown around the world, we did have 244 cities participate still in some way, whatever way they could in their city. And although we made fewer observations during those 4 days than we did in 2019 with 815,000, we still had more participants than ever with 41,000 people. So still, even though as we were all kind of in various stages of learning about the pandemic and locking down, we were still able to get more people than ever connecting to their local nature in whatever way they could in 2020. And so we wanted just to end with some fun, interesting finds from the City Nature Challenge. You know, when you collect hundreds of thousands of observations around the world, you're always bound to find things you were not expecting. And this happens every year during the City Nature Challenge, but we figured we would share some highlights from 2020 since it was an exceptional year. And as we're sharing these, we would love if you want to tell us in the chat about a favorite nature encounter you've had where you live, like Lila getting super excited about this black sea hare that we found in the tide pools down in Los Angeles. So as we're going through these, tell us in the chat what's a favorite nature encounter you've had where you live. So during the City Nature Challenge, we always make observations of things that are very rarely seen, like this beautiful nudibranch, the sea slug that was found in Taiwan. It was only the second observation ever in Taiwan of this sea slug. Or this spotted slimy salamander, white-spotted slimy salamander that hadn't actually been seen in this particular county since 1977, and a high school student found it in the Washington, D.C. City Nature Challenge. This beautiful orchid, it was the first record in Honduras of this orchid on both iNaturalist and GBIF, which holds museum specimen records. This is a pretty important record. There's also really just fun finds that people find during the City Nature Challenge, things that just kind of connect them to nature and their city in a new way. This is one of my favorites. Someone uploaded a GIF of this bioluminescent dinoflagellate. We were having a red tide off the coast of Southern California then, and so this person took photos of people night surfing. And because we know what the dinoflagellate is, this is a research-grade observation on iNaturalist now, and it's one of my favorite observations from the City Nature Challenge. There were also really cool observations that happened because we were on lockdown and nature was showing up in places that we don't normally find it. Like this bobcat, for example, that ate this hare over the span of 6 hours in someone's backyard in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And the whole neighborhood got to watch, which was pretty amazing. And then we'll end with another one from the UK, this gray seal that swam miles upriver, or kilometers upriver for the UK folks, kilometers upriver in the UK through a highly urbanized area to be observed in the Bristol and Bath City Nature Challenge. So with that, we will pass it over to Matt and Victoria to talk a little bit more about the UK.
Thanks very much, Alison. That's a fantastic kind of whistle-stop tour from both of you as well on the challenge, and it's amazing to see just the scale of things coming together. Before we go straight into thinking about the UK as well, I just had sort of one particularly interesting question that just jumped out as well, and I think might come into some of what me and Victoria will talk about in the UK context. But there's just a question on sort of what happens with the data afterwards, and whether there are any kind of examples of people going on to use the data from City Nature Challenge to push on some particular conservation movements as well. So any of those kind of examples that you're aware of from the global story?
So we do ask for our organizers to let us know who they're sharing their data with. From a paper that Alison and I worked on, we do know that conservation outcomes where data is being used in policy is kind of under-recorded, and so we are trying to get people in the habit of recording who's sharing their data and how it's being used. In Los Angeles, we share the data, and actually we have participants from our city and county governments, from the sustainability offices, and they've actually written in City Nature Challenge participation into our local sustainability plans for the city and county of Los Angeles. But there's so many different ways it gets used, but that's just a little quick
Yeah, we find, the local level is where the data gets used most often. If people work with their local parks departments or their city governments or things like that, especially when people find rare or endangered species that people didn't, like a new population that people didn't know were there, or new populations of invasive species. Those tend to be the two things that we see almost immediate management action get taken from observations of the City Nature, from the City Nature Challenge.
Fantastic. And I suppose that leads us into Victoria, sort of thinking from a UK context, where we've got a really long-standing history of amateur participation in, amateur in inverted commas, participation in this kind of wildlife recording practice. For hundreds of years, it's been a kind of UK hobbyist pastime that has generated huge data sets of wildlife records stretching back for a very long time. And there's a whole kind of sector within the UK of organisations and voluntary schemes and societies and local record centres who hold all of that data, that's then aggregated by an organisation called the NBN Trust, which is the National Biodiversity Network. It's the UK's largest nature partnership. And so that data all gets kind of aggregated onto a website called the NBN Atlas, which I strongly recommend checking out at some point for all of your wildlife data needs for the UK. And we've been working with the iNaturalist platform that is this kind of very internationally focused platform to be able to feed data into that existing UK system. But one of the interesting things about this platform, I think, and Victoria, we can sort of look at as well, is using this. We've been doing this wildlife recording a lot in the UK for a long time, but it's been pen and paper for a very long time. And part of what City Nature Challenge has kind of introduced to the UK is this app, iNaturalist. And although we have a lot of UK-based apps, they tend to be very aimed towards, they're kind of designed by existing naturalists for existing naturalists. And one of the things that iNaturalist as an app and a platform does is it kind of opens things up and lowers some of those barriers. And so it'd be really interesting sort of thinking, if I sort of hand over to you, Victoria, to think about how you used that functionality and you brought that out in London, particularly thinking in 2020, where you had some very strict lockdown in April in London as well.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of the iNaturalist app and website, just because it is such a low barrier to entry. You don't even know what you're looking at. It is to put it on. You can just take your picture, pop it up, and hopefully someone even the other side of the world will be able to tell you if it's plant, animal, vegetable, and or what you could write down to a species level if that's possible from photographs. So that's great. So sort of within 2020, certainly in the previous years in London, we've done a lot of kind of these face-to-face BioBlitz events, and of course that wasn't possible this year. So we really had to change to a more online format, providing activities, although during London in April, May, we were allowed out for exercise. We didn't really feel comfortable encouraging people to take photographs while they're out and about, although it probably would have been okay. We sort of didn't want to seem to be encouraging that, just because it might give some sort of organisational, reputational issues. So we very much focused on what people could see in their homes and gardens. We already had some nice resources from previous projects about identifying spiders in your home, for example, which we're able to share on our website. And what you can see from your windows, for example, wrote a bit about how you can look out and look at the mosses and lichens on your roof, and little bits of nature like that, which is something I'm always particularly keen to encourage, because one of the things we found with our audience research at the museum is that people often think of nature as something apart from the cities, that it's out, you've got to go outside the city to find it. And of course, that's not the case. It's really kind of thinking a little bit more, thinking about what is nature. And it's not just some marvelous tree in the wilderness. It's also those little bits, patches of moss and lichen growing on the walls, and all the little creatures that live in them. So I really like how City Nature Challenge can sort of bring that into the people that live in cities.
I think it's really interesting as well, because it contrasts a little bit with what we were experiencing over. So we ran the city submission for Bristol and Bath. We get a lot of stick for having two cities, but they're very small compared to San Francisco or LA. So we think we can get away with it. And I think that it was really interesting because at the time there was a huge amount of social stigma, I think, around kind of the lockdown in London in particular, where the kind of social behaviour took a bit longer than a lot of the rest of the country to kind of catch up with some of the changes in how the kind of social behaviour around the pandemic was coming in, or at least that was some of the media perception and stories at the time. And so it was really interesting how the reputational risk was kind of different in different parts of the country. And in Bristol and Bath, we were at that point but we were encouraging people the kind of three-parter of sort of saying, looking out of your windows, in your garden, and or in your 1 hour government sanctioned outdoor exercise. And we were kind of, and it was really interesting as well, watching some of the data as it came in. You could actually see, there were people recording over a single walk, that you could actually see that they'd done a huge amount of recording and really packed into that walk, which was really interesting. And I think that there was something. So in the UK, we also saw this kind of change from competition to collaboration as an opportunity, and it was really interesting because I think we've always had as part of the City Nature Challenge, there's kind of, the competition is an important part of the motivation for people getting involved. But when that was kind of, people were going to have various different levels of handicaps for that in terms of what were allowed to do in terms of going outside, it was really important to sort of open that out. And so one of the things that we did in the UK was the 10 cities that were taking part. We kind of all clubbed together. We got ourselves on a Zoom call and said, well, why don't we just create a kind of UK-wide map and encourage everyone, whether they're in our cities or outside our cities, we can still do our own little City Nature Challenge, so that if you are locked down outside of one of these 10 cities, you can still take part. And Victoria, while I'll if I share the screen of the map of the results that we got over the 2 days, just to show the kind of UK map, I think it would be interesting to hear from the point of view of a big engagement organisation like the Natural History Museum in London, how you found that kind of fit in with your engagement and with all of the things that were kind of being cancelled, with the museum itself being closed at the time, how that really how that worked for you as an organisation. Well.
Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful to be able to do this more collaborative work. I mean, the museum is based in London, but we do have national and international programs, of course. And it was really nice to be able to involve lots of people from all over the UK, wherever they are. There's still something they can be involved with. And also working with partner organisations as well. A lot of them in the past have said, oh, we can't be too London-centric. And of course, this solved the problem with that. They were still able to be engaged with it. And so it's really working. And we're really hoping that we can continue to incorporate City Nature Challenge within our kind of national programme, and as well as our more local London-centric programmes.
Yeah, and you can see here, there's some little clusters where you can see where our cities are, but these are the results over those over that 4-day weekend for the UK. You can see all of the records that were made, and you can see there's kind of some real heat clusters around the cities that were taking part. So we had the kind of northern cluster up here, the Midlands, we had Bristol and Bath, just here there's London, and our Scottish cities taking part, and we even got a few, even though there weren't cities, there weren't a specific city from Northern Ireland jumping in, we still got lots. And you can see all of these records from outside of the main city clusters that have come in as well. And actually, I'll drop a link to this in the chat, but you can explore the data. You can go right down to this record near Manchester of a marsh marigold on April 24th. As well, you can go right down to that level of detail to see these records take place. There's a bit of a scorecard entering into some of the competitive element. You can see which individual person collected the most records. You can see all some of the records that were collected, and as you can see from these numbers, we got over 72,000 observations from nearly 5,000 people taking part. And remembering that that's just in the 4 days of the challenge itself. We actually were able to track that number of people trebled over the following 6 weeks of taking part. It's one of the brilliant things around this kind of app technology is that it allows us to track beyond the event itself what people's ongoing behavior beyond the actual action itself. So there's a couple more questions coming in through the chat. So what I might do is if I kind of relay a few of those and I'll throw them out to you guys almost panel style. And we'll see if we can pick up, we discussed a few kind of themes that we might want to pick up as we go along, and we'll sort of try and see if we can drop those in alongside people's questions. I think we've got about 15 minutes left to do so. So we should be pretty good. Everyone happy with that? Lovely. I'll just see if I can pick up. What I'll do is first, while I have a quick look back through the chat as well, maybe I'll just sort of start us off. Maybe to get your thoughts on some of that idea of the kind of differential motivation, how people, some people may be motivated by that kind of challenge and that competition, and some more by the collaboration, and whether you feel like those are sort of mutually exclusive or they kind of can complement each other as well, and what you've seen through this kind of enforced experiment of 2020.
Yeah, I can start with that, and then other folks can chime in. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive at all. We know, especially for cities that are not like really big cities like San Francisco or Cape Town or places like that, there is this sense kind of like, oh, but like we could never actually win the City Nature Challenge because we're not a really big city. We don't have, hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people in our city like some cities do. But what we find is that even when people are more working on the collaboration side of it, just thinking about let's all do this together around the whole world, that sometimes people still will come up with fun local competitions. So even though like here in San Francisco, we always say like we don't care if we win, we just want to beat Los Angeles. So we often find that other cities will come up with smaller competitions that even if they know that they're not in it for like the big numbers and that they're going to win in the way that we call winning the City Nature Challenge, that a lot of times people do get motivated just by small competitions as well. One of my favorites was last year we had Birmingham, Alabama, which is a pretty big city in Alabama here in the US, against Birmingham in the Black Country in the UK, just because they have the same name. So I love those little competitions as well that can play up also. And so I think there is something really lovely about thinking how, hundreds of thousands of people around the world are all going out in their cities, especially during this last year in whatever way they could, and searching for nature together. But it still is sometimes fun to have a small competition in there too. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. What do you think, Lila or Victoria?
I think, well, we did an evaluation in that the first year we went national in the US, and a lot of the responses were kind of on the divide of some people really are motivated by competition and some people are really motivated by collaboration. And this was from organizers, and then we also had some participants fill out the evaluation through iNaturalist, sharing the link there. And so we really, we'd already had that as a thing within our ethos of how we like to do that. I can be sometimes competitive, and sometimes I'm actually more collaborative. And so it was really nice to see that in the data. And when we finally put pen to paper to write down our goals, we were really kind of making sure that fun was one of them. And so we know that people want to either be competitors or collaborators. But as the poll might show, some people might sit on the fence and like a little bit of both.
Yeah, I find the same. Certainly sometimes I just want to find as many things as possible, and other times keen to work together. And the way I like about it is that you can kind of adapt it for your particular, what motivates you, which is great and necessary when you're working with cities across the world, because often here in London we think, how can we compete with nice sunny California in our wet and dreary city? But it doesn't necessarily have to be a competition. You can compete with yourself. You can look at how well you're doing compared to previous years, for example, or compete with your nearest city. Yeah, there's lots of different scope for different things on collaboration and competition, which is really good. There's some interesting questions coming through on evaluating.
Yeah, I was going to mention that we seem to have a lot of things on inclusivity, particularly some interest on whether we have any idea of the kind of demographics that are taking part, and I'm sure that has a kind of country to country differences as well, but also about the technology access and how people have been overcoming those kind of challenges. So I suppose those two questions maybe come hand in hand a little bit as well.
Yeah, so we don't have demographic information from the few evaluations we've done for participants. We didn't collect that, and we need to do better, first of all. Secondly, we need money. This isn't give us money, although if someone's on here and has money, give us money. Alison and I don't get paid extra to do this. This is on top of our regular job, and it's grown slowly, exponentially over time. And it's basically us cobbling things together. So this sounds like a lot of excuses, and it kind of is. These are the excuses. Like, we don't have the money to do evaluation, and we barely have the time to run the challenge ourselves. So again, we need to do better, and I want to try to find some money this year. But COVID and our budgets in the US are our budget, our museum has been cut. I can't even imagine. It's 75% of my budget has been cut. So this all sounds, sorry about that. But yeah, we need to do a better job. I know from when we visually evaluate our organizers, it is mostly white people, white women who are organizing. We do have some racial diversity because we do have organizers in different countries. But yeah, we've been thinking a lot at both our institutions, Alison's and mine, about anti-racism work. I know that they're thinking about this in the UK and London as well. We work on a big grants together, so we do this work together as well. And yeah, we need to be better about inclusivity and accessibility. It is harder in COVID, I think, to do these things. But we're drastically doing that work within our institutions to change our programs. It's just we haven't had the bandwidth and time to kind of let that bleed into City Nature Challenge yet. It's slowly coming in. There's some conflict that comes up amongst organizers when we scale to this level. Not a huge amount of conflict, but some conflict has arisen. And so we're trying to use restorative practices from restorative justice as a way to do that. So we're not perpetuating white supremacy culture in our organizing, but we know that we have work to do in that area as well.
I think actually it's leads on to another point that I think would be really interesting. I think you mentioned the kind of the budget challenge there, and that a lot of the these are big numbers that you quoted in your presentation, and this is huge participation levels with a huge amount of work that goes into it, and not only from the two of you at that kind of organizational level and your teams at your organizations, but also that you've got these 200 and something cities, each of which have a partnership of organizations usually with several people. So the people hours that go into it usually, I would say from most of it, it's either additional to the day job. It's kind of, there's a huge amount of voluntary stuff that goes in there, or it's kind of tacked on to other things. I know for us, we kind of do a lot of that work. We have to attach it to other things that we're doing so that we can justify the time on it as well. And for something that has such dramatic outputs, it is very interesting, and I'd be really interested to hear, I think, about how I think a lot of people would be jealous of, well, perhaps jealous or kind of, and you might think otherwise with the amount of work that it brings you, but of the success and the growth that you've seen from that kind of 2 organizations and 2 cities to in, what is it, 5 years, having this kind of global takeover with so many people, nearly 1 million records in 4 days. I think it would be to hear how that has come about and what tools you've maybe been able to use to help make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of like making the City Nature Challenge happen, we couldn't do it without all those local organizers. And finding them has always just been word of mouth. Like, we've never reached out to any city and said, hey, we think you should do the City Nature Challenge. Like, who can you find for us? It's all been about people just hearing about it and saying, like either that they have a job that aligns somewhere within, getting people connected to nature or collecting biodiversity records, anywhere in that span in there. Luckily, that kind of encompasses a lot of potential organizations. And so a lot of people can organize as part of their job at some portion because it aligns with their mission. But we also, we had a homeschooled high school student organizing the city of Chicago for years. Like, people also do it totally on their own time as well. But we couldn't do it without all those people in their local cities who know, like, they know their city best. They know how to like get the word out. They know how, how to run this in their city in the way that works the best for them. And then what Lila and I try to do is just give those organizers the training. If you don't know how to use iNaturalist, we do a lot of work on teaching people how to use that, or whatever, they can use another platform too, if it makes sense for their city. We try to give people resources, lots of resources. And wonderfully, our organizers are also really good at sharing resources amongst each other too, which is lovely. So like the tools, the training, the resources to then take that and then implement the City Nature Challenge in their city. But it does take a lot of work. We start organizing 6 months ahead of each City Nature Challenge, just to make sure that everyone has the time to really like learn everything and digest everything and make those projects and make those city boundaries and all those sorts of things that you need to do to make the City Nature Challenge happen. And luckily, we have also had, we have an organizer in Argentina who does all of our meetings for us in Spanish. After Lila and I hold 3 meetings on 3 different days at 3 different time zones to help accommodate time zones around the world. Like, every time we're communicating information, we communicate it 3 times on 3 days at 3 different times to make sure everyone has a chance to join those meetings. But then we have an organizer who totally on her own holds those meetings again for us in Spanish for all of our Spanish speaking organizers, because a lot of our organizers don't speak English as, a first or even second language. So it's been, we count a lot on those local organizers to make this work. And we just try to do the best we can in supporting them.
Yeah, and we would love to be able to pay Anna and other organizers to like step up to that, to those roles that are, again, they're voluntary. And we know not everyone can afford to do voluntary work. So that is something that we're also thinking about how we can do. Again, we've cobbled together money. We have an organizer in LA who helps us do global organizing and helps with the website and helps with communication. And that's because I kind of just have cobbled together small chunks of money into a part-time position for her. But honestly, like, we could use her full time. Like, Alison and I are like, we can just keep at the level above the water level here, just about.
Every year we say it can't get any bigger than this. Like, how can we do this again if it's bigger? And then every year it just gets bigger.
I think that's a really interesting, and Victoria, would be good to sort of bring you in as well as one of those local organisers. And you're obviously supported by the Natural History Museum, but it's kind of whether your time is kind of included within your wider work, or how City Nature Challenge strategically fits in as well. I know for us, it's kind of we fit it in as a big part of our public offering for the Festival of Nature, is kind of how we build it in.
Yes, I mean, it's fitted in as part of our citizen science program. So there's no actual kind of dedicated role for it as such. It's more a couple of people pitching in the bit of time they have in it. But it does fit so well with the museum's vision. It would be really nice to see it having a more integral role in the future. But it is fantastic that Alison, Lila, and all the others on the team provide such amazing kind of resources that we can kind of pick up and translate into however it works for us. So we've got already templates that we can put in our own city pictures, and which just makes it really easy, because I'm not a graphic designer. Our graphic designer at the museum probably don't have the capacity to do that, and so it's really
it is so useful as well, because I think it's interesting that in 2020, in the year of COVID and pandemics and everyone going on to Zoom, is that I already knew Zoom, and I already knew how Google things because of City Nature Challenge. So some of the skills from City Nature Challenge had preloaded our team to be able to work remotely in that way. So I think it's really interesting that some of the tools that you were using to just manage this global community have now been so widely adopted, and that allow us to do things like this, and suddenly this is. It would be interesting just to hear in our last few minutes maybe about your experience of how kind of you were pioneering some of those tools in many ways for working internationally in that way.
Yeah, one of the funny stories from I think it was the very first time, just in maybe 2017, Lila, like we were just like, okay, we're gonna have a phone call with all the organizers, and I set up a conference line at my museum and told everyone to dial in at the same time. And that's when I realized that our conference lines have like a cap of like 8 people. I had no idea. Like right when people were trying to call in, and we're getting all these emails of like, I can't join. What should we do? And that's when we knew, we're like, we need to find a solution that we can have like lots of people on a call together. So that was, I think, the year we started using Zoom as a way to get people together. And it's amazing how much better Zoom has gotten since the pandemic. The fact that we can now have phone calls with everyone's video on, like all the previous years, we've always told people to keep their video off because it just eats up bandwidth and everything freezes. But Zoom has gotten so much better during the pandemic that we could definitely have a lot more. We can see our organizers, which has been amazing this year. And yeah, we always share our resources through like a Google Drive folder. We do shared drive sometimes, or just sometimes there's a shared folder that people can access all the resources that we have, and they can also drop in their own resources as well. And then in the last few years, we also started using Slack, mostly as a way for our organizers to communicate with each other. We know that there's so much knowledge and so much like creativity and amazing excitement for the City Nature Challenge among our organizers that, one, it was a little bit too much to have everybody email just me and Lila and Amy, who's the first other organizer. When anyone had a question, those emails were coming to us, and we were just getting overwhelmed with them. And so having a Slack workspace allows our organizers to ask actually questions of each other, and especially because we now have organizers who've been doing it for 5 years, that a lot of our organizers can answer people's questions and support each other and talk about things that have worked in their own cities that can apply to other people's cities as well. So really supporting that organizer community has, like through Slack, has been really amazing, and is another one of those tech tools that have really helped us in the City Nature Challenge.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I think that but we were just perfectly poised unintentionally to make a project and an event still happen with COVID. Like you were saying, everyone's now on Zoom. More people are using Google, Drive for this work. And this was like the only way you could do this work. You can only do this work with global organizers when you are doing phone calls or video conferences across the globe, and then sharing resources in a place where people can co-edit a document or drop their document. And actually, it's caused our museum to internally change how they do practices. Our museum everyone uses the Google Drive as a resource sharing place. We had this very archaic system before that. So yeah, and I think that we've definitely had organizers like, wait, Google Drive, what is that? And so there's some, and what is Slack and how do I use it? So there's some training that needs to happen to help folks in those areas. But again, it's just had these unintended consequences of really paying off because of COVID, and that's how we all have to work remotely now.
I think that is a fantastic sort of way to bring us to a close, is that idea of that actually out of this global challenge has actually also both the City Nature Challenge, but also out of the 2020 pandemic challenges, that we've all found these new ways of working, and it's kind of brought opportunities as much as it's brought challenge, and it's really opportunities for this kind of collaboration and collaborative work. On which note, we are drawing to the end of our time. What I'm going to ask my fellow speakers to do so is first to thank you all, and thank you very much for our California contingent. We'll release you back to enjoy your Thanksgiving, and eat as much turkey as you should like, or veggie turkey, as per, and thank you very much. I will be disappearing, and I would encourage everyone to come and join me and Savita. I'll be reappearing on the stage, where we will be doing the swap, so you can hear a bit about what's been happening in other sessions throughout the day. And then I will just remains for me to thank all of our speakers once again, and ask everyone to switch off their cameras if anyone does, and we will capture what's in the chat as well, so that we can share some of those views afterwards if we didn't get to any of your questions. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.